2008, 2 years from mid-May. For misdemeanors would be mid-May of 2010. That's for misdemeanor charges.
But felony charges, if there's any...
Felony charges, there's a 6-year statute of limitations, and that would run 4 years longer.
Now, you said for Marc Dann to sign this grant, knowing that it was perhaps potentially not going where it should have gone, is there any culpability that at some point Marc knew he was doing something for his wife, who was theoretically a public official at YSU, and that from his end he authorizes something that he should not have?
As I've said before, the investigation is ongoing with respect to the former Attorney General, but under Ohio law, where you know your spouse has an interest in a grant, you can't divide or provide public money for that interest, for that contract. And that's the question at hand at the present time.
Are all roads leading back to Marc Dann eventually, though?
The investigation continues, and with the former Attorney General being part of that investigation, that's what the prosecutor's office and our office is trying to figure out right now.
Is one of the elements that Alyssa pled to that she knowingly did this?
Yes. In fact, it says that she knows that she has an unlawful interest in a public contract. That's part of the element of the offense, and that's part of the reason for a guilty plea. Keep in mind that there was nothing wrong with Youngstown State or any university soliciting grant funds from the Attorney General's office. The question was the relationship of the spouse to those grant funds, and in her role as a public official, what her own public responsibility was overall. And as I said before, the report will show that there was this solicitation for grant funds started less than 3 months after the Attorney General became the Attorney General. And it appears from the record, originally was thought that they would look at a much larger sum of federal grant monies, which were intended for DNA research and DNA testing. And in fact, that was the reason why those funds were not tapped overall.
Had she ever applied for any other grant under a prior Attorney General?
Not that we're familiar with.
How much could those larger funds have been?
I think the record shows they could have been a couple $100,000. And there is a statement by Mr. Simpson in the record that there was a leftover amount of funds from the prior Attorney General administration that had not been used and that they were available to be used. And later on, there is another statement from Mr. Simpson that there were Byzantine rules governing federal grants, and that was the reason why that money could not be used.
But the original application was for, as you said, a couple $100,000.
The original application was for this money. The discussion about whether there was money available for the grant originally was involved federal funds.
And they realized they couldn't do that.
That's exactly right.
That's exactly right.
And the report will describe that in detail in emails that went back and forth. The report also will describe questions from the committee about whether Alyssa was an instructor involved in the grant, and what appears to be misleading statements from Mr. Simpson that she was not involved in the grant.
Again, what was Mr. Simpson's role? Was he the person that told this committee that...
Mr. Simpson was the chief of staff of the former Attorney General. Mr. Simpson was the lead spokesperson for the grant in the Attorney General's office, even prior to their grant review committee being responsible for reviewing the grant.
And he told this committee what? That a decision had already been made? Or?
A couple witnesses within the committee said that Mr. Simpson represented that the deal was done, and that they felt that their role in reviewing the grant was just superficial to the substance of the grant.
You pointed out this was a plea agreement. Was there any consideration ever of charging her on any of the Zesty Dishes stuff or the OAG transition?
There was consideration involving more serious charges involving Ms. Lenhoff, both with soliciting a contract where she had an interest and other related charges to the investigation.
But as long as she continues to cooperate now, there'll be no further charges?
Yeah, and I think we really have to stress with the prosecutor's office that her cooperation has been full and fair and open. This has been an extremely embarrassing event for her overall. And I think from the vantage point of the investigators and the prosecutor, we expect her to continue to cooperate without any problem.
Excuse me. I guess we had a little camera problem there, so I need to ask a question again. She didn't know at the time that this was something that was wrong. Do you have any reason to believe that she did at the time know that this was the wrong thing to do?
Well, I think as I said before, a lot of the defendants that we have here in municipal court will argue at the time they didn't know anything was wrong. She entered a plea of guilty to knowingly having an unlawful interest in a public contract. and that was why she was before the court. Sometimes we describe conflicts of interest as those interests that people don't self-recognize. That's the reason why ethics provisions protecting the public protect against people having some conflict in their private role with their public duties and responsibilities. In this case, so far, with the 4 actors that have pled, is all about the misuse of public funds, public resources for personal outside business use, for enhancing salary, non-reporting that to the public in any way, shape, or form, and that's why the prosecutor and the Ethics Commission is concerned.
Did anybody ever tell her it's wrong while she was doing this?
I don't know the answer to that. I know that you'll find in the report, if you read it, that there were questions raised about the propriety of a grant for a BCI agent that was involved, that was going to be teaching, who stepped out of that because of those proprieties, and the question of the closeness to Youngstown State, where Alyssa was working at the time of the grant solicitation.
And she was formerly an investigative reporter?
I believe she worked as a reporter for the Tribune Chronicle in Warren, Ohio.
Where do we get the...
From the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office, and I think you might want to check on the 14th floor with Mr. O'Brien. He might be available for a comment as well.
Okay, thank you.
Can you clarify again what the plea agreement was? What did she get out of this? What was the penalty?
She has a maximum $1,000 fine, 10 days suspended, incarceration as long as she continues to fully cooperate overall. Trying to think if there's anything else.
No community service?
No community service. The 10 days could be imposed, and community sanctions control could be imposed if she doesn't continue to cooperate overall.
Okay.
What do you have on Marc Dann, and when are you going to do it?
The investigation continues, and we'll see what the outcome of the investigation will be.
Is Marc Dann the last person involved in this that hasn't faced charges?
The former Attorney General is the most senior person in the investigation, and certainly all the others reported directly to him, except for his spouse, potentially.
Okay.